Fantastic. Today we are live on the SEO Leadership webinar, and today we have an incredible guest. We have on Itamar. He's a senior SEO director over at Studio Hawk. Studio Hawk has been doing some incredible and amazing feats. They've been expanding from Australia over to the UK and now in the US as well. So they have been doing a sort of somewhat global domination, if I can call it that. So we're very excited for our guest on today. Itamar has worked with a broad spectrum of companies from SMEs over to billion-dollar enterprises and has played a pivotal role in training in-house teams to succeed at every stage of growth. So today we're going to be talking to Itamar about how SEO evolves as business grows, key SEO challenges at every stage of growth, and a lot more. So we're very excited to have you on today, Itamar. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing very well, thank you. It's a lovely afternoon here, sunny London, which I don't really get to say often at all. But no, really great to be here, and thank you for having me.
That's a great day. Happy to hear that. Itamar, we usually kick things off with our guests by asking them a little bit about how they got into SEO and how they got to where they are now, just so that our listeners have sort of an understanding of your career progression, your experience, and things before we kick into our questions.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think my background has always been very linear in terms of digital marketing. Within the actual digital marketing industry, my career really sort of started off in 2008, and at the time I was more sort of into creation of content and video content primarily. So that was sort of the things that I was doing, posting on YouTube with multiple different types of channels and categories and topics. And it got to the point where I was like, I need people to find this content, because at the time I didn't really have much money. So I was like, I'm not going to be able to afford to, spend ads to get people to see my content. So I had to find the way to do that organically and really build up a way in terms of what it means to optimize content online. And so it started off with the video side of things. And then over time, I sort of naturally transitioned, focusing more on websites and businesses, because I saw that as being more prosper, I guess, to sort of for like long-term success in terms of how I could be able to advance my skills and my career. And that's sort of how that transitioned over. So it's something that I've kind of really always done. I've not really done anything else, any other type of job or thing in my life really when it came to doing this. So that's all I've really ever done.
Awesome. And I know that you did study marketing as well, if I'm correct, in university. How can you tell us about how how it was your experience studying it versus like putting it into actual practice in the industry, and how it's evolved over time as well?
Yeah, I mean, marketing at a university level, at least when I was studying, it's great to learn theory. It's great to understand, principles and all these sorts of things, and read some books and get an understanding in terms of a bit of psychology and all of this stuff. But in terms of like digital marketing, it's a very challenging thing for universities, because for how fast, especially nowadays, for how things
Yeah.
are changing so quickly, it takes a long time for universities and these sort of higher education institutions to update their curriculum. So by the time they update something, then it's probably already 2 years behind anyway. So in terms of actually learning practical applications, that's something that, is quite challenging. But, everyone, at least from like my friends growing up, everyone was sort of going to university. So I felt like, let's just do that, as that was the sort of thing people did.
And how did you, when you sort of entered into the real world, were there any particular mentors that helped you through and transition into the role that you were at the time, SEO specialist, and evolving upwards? And were there any particular traits that you can attest to those mentors that you would consider great mentorship qualities?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke with a lot of people early on. There was lots of people I connected with, and specifically, it was a lot of people that I sort of saw as being very active within the SEO community specifically, and sort of reaching out, trying to have conversations, whether that's online, whether that's offline, and be able to learn from their experiences. And I think what that sort of did for me is it was able to help me really save a good few years of doing things maybe in the wrong way, or to learn from other people's mistakes so that I could sort of save myself from having to make those mistakes, if that made sense. So I think that was very beneficial in terms of having a very clear sort of progression or some kind of pathway for me to sort of know where to focus my efforts and really refine my skill set as well.
Fantastic. One thing that stood out quite a lot, especially with the work that you posted about, is that you've worked with such an impressive range of companies as well, from SMEs to billion-dollar enterprises. So I wanted to ask if you could give us a bit of a brief overview of how SEO needs to evolve as business grows, and especially from an SEO standpoint, how you approached those different stages of evolution.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times when obviously you work with a client, they'll be at a certain point. Now, you can always try and figure out where it is that they're going on a sort of macro level, right? Where the business actually wants to see itself in the
Mm.
future. But a lot of times when you sort of come in, they will be at a set level, whether they're sort of enterprise level, whether they're SME level, and the needs are going to be different. I mean, you can argue that, yeah, everyone wants SEO, but of course, within different company sizes, within different industries, within different jurisdictions as well, depending on where they're located, there's always going to be things that you have to tailor, because not every two businesses are the same, in my opinion. I think there's always going to be unique sets of challenges and things that will work well or better for any particular type of site. And obviously, it's different people you're dealing with as well, which is always its own challenge. And there's always things that sort of come with that. So it really is a whole mix. But I guess this is why we're sort of having this discussion to sort of dig into that a bit more.
And what are some of the biggest SEO challenges that you think SMEs face compared to larger enterprises? Something that I think I spoke about this earlier today was that, especially with the evolution of AI, there's also the challenges of how SMEs are taking that on to save on resources versus enterprise. And you'd think that enterprise wouldn't be using AI as much, but it's quite cutthroat at the moment. So yeah, how have you been tackling that? Hmm.
Yeah, I think the concept of efficiency, that's going to be standard whether you're a small business or a massive company, right? Like everyone wants to be efficient because everyone wants to be profitable. That's why people create businesses. So if you're not efficient, you're most likely wasting resource or money in one way or another. So from that aspect, I completely understand it. And I do see big companies, small companies trying to use AI. The biggest challenges for SMEs is always going to be budget because they are small. A lot of times they're going to use that as the sort of the excuse. If you have a conversation with them, they're like, yeah, we're a small business. And I'm like, immediately, I'm like, okay, I understand you don't want to pay as much money as you may possibly should. I'm not saying that you have to, because obviously it depends on their budget levels. But usually I sort of get a sense of like, okay, we want to go for something a bit more cost effective here because we're small. And that is viable because a lot of small businesses don't have a lot of capital. And a lot of them are, especially for marketing, which you think, if you're assuming that maybe 10% of your revenue should be spent on marketing on the whole, then it's like, okay, well, what chunk of that are you going to put into SEO? That's a different conversation entirely. And different companies or different SMEs even will sort of have different ways of how they calculate that, or at least what value they see in SEO as a function to allocate budget into it. So the challenge really is always going to be budget for SMEs, because they might say, look, we want to get here and we want to beat our competition, but if you aren't realistic about what it takes and you don't have that budget, then you're probably going to need to reevaluate your expectations in terms of what is going to be realistic to achieve based on the amount of resources that someone like an SEO agency would be able to do in order to help you.
Awesome. And Itamar, obviously you mentioned about like sort of smaller budgets for SMEs. I know again it probably changes on what sort of niche and industry they're in as well, and even like sort of the size of their website. But is there sort of a tendency to focus more on sort of technical or content for those sort of limited budget? Like where do you put the sort of focus on?
Yeah, I think so. That's a good question. I think with that, you always have to prioritize, because at the end of the day, if you're limited with your resources, you're going to have to do what's actually going to be the most impactful thing for the business. Otherwise, it can be something that may help over the long term, sure, but if you're not going to be seeing those results sooner especially as an SME who is sort of like, they've got growth targets that they need to hit, and they want to grow their business and they don't have as much cash to use and to invest. So you have to prioritize. And I mean, there's, for example, this was, I think, a couple of days ago. So I had a chat with a prospect who, they're an ecom. They're not a massive business, but they're an ecom site. They're selling loads of different products with big AOVs, probably between 1 to 2K USD. And what they were sort of telling me is, like, with current providers that they've got, they're like, well, they're just sort of pumping out blogs, like they're doing that every single month. And then I'm like, I look at their visibility and I'm like, look, only 6 of the, I think it was just over 2,000 keywords that they were visible for in the US are pointing to a blog post, and none of them are in the top 10. So I'm like, if this is where your investment is going, to just pump out blogs that you don't rank for, or you're not really getting that value in, then that's wasted resource. You're not prioritizing your efforts well enough. And so these are the sorts of things where we come into it and take a look at a site and we're like, okay, look, these are the things you need to fix because you want to make money. And obviously I'm using e-commerce as an example, but it doesn't really matter. It could be a professional service business, B2B, whatever it may be. It's like, you need to prioritize in what's actually going to create impact. Otherwise you're wasting your money. And really, if you're the one who's providing that service, you're probably not going to be, working with that business for a long time, because they'll just run out of money and they not see any sort of returns on their investment.
Awesome. I love that. And I know you sort of kind of touched on it, but for like a small business owner who is maybe just at the minute carrying out SEO themselves, who's not necessarily an expert, are there any sort of tips for them to sort of implement into their website so that when they do have the budget or the revenue to invest in an SEO agency, that they can get sort of the maximum return off that investment?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, because in my opinion, like, if you're a founder or CEO, like, you're doing so many different things, like, you've got so much on your plate, and it's like, if you're forced to be having to do some type of implementation or executing on SEO activities, then I would say initially there seems to be like a bit of an issue generally in terms of how you're set up. Like, you should at least have some kind of, even if you've got like a marketing exec who is going to just have to do everything for a while until you're able to sort of get off the ground a bit more and raise some more capital, and then be able to invest that back into your team and sort of growing out the functions of your business. That it's going to be tricky for you. I mean, that we have dealt with it before, where we've dealt with founders who wanted to be hands-on, and that was more from their proactivity, just because they were really interested and they really sort of believed in the concept of SEO. And in that cases, it's more about sort of just giving them an understanding of, like, well, these are the things you should be really focusing on. And you kind of just, like I said before, really just play into the priorities and say, look, don't focus about this. If it's like your blog, like, don't focus about your blog for the next at least 4 or 5 months until you made sure all of your commercial pages are set up correctly. They're all targeting the right things. They all make sense. You've checked it. You've got all the right types of elements in there. You've got your CTAs, and that you've optimized those so that they can have a chance to rank. Because if you don't have that, it's like, what's the point of creating blog posts? If people even find it, they're not going to really know exactly what you do, so they'll just probably leave anyway. So it's really about, getting the priorities sort of set from the beginning and making people know that it's like there are certain things you need to do at different stages.
Awesome.
I think building off of that, one of the questions that we had is, when a business is scaling, what key areas should be prioritized within an SEO strategy to ensure long-term growth? So I think my question, just in relation to your answer, is what should, from an SEO, from a client's perspective and SME's perspective, what should they be looking for just to ensure that they, I guess, don't get screwed around or waste time or any resources, just to ensure long-term, the best, most sustainable long-term growth?
Yeah, I think it comes down to knowing exactly what they mean when they say they want to scale. Like, does that mean you're going to do some product development? Are you going to introduce new products or services within your business? Is it just the case of, well, we're selling the same stuff, we just want to sell more of it? So I think in terms of the type of scaling that you're doing, there's going to be different things that you're going to focus on. Of course, if it's the former, then it's going to be a lot more complicated, because if you're introducing new types of offerings, especially if you haven't offered them before, then of course you're not going to have any historical authority that sort of cements your site to be known to be relevant for that particular area. So you're going to need to be doing more work because, again, you don't have any historical sort of footprint there. So there's going to be a lot more, you need to create more content. You're going to need to build more links. You're going to need to really sort of do a lot more of the work there, as opposed to just saying, well, our stock is going to stay the same, or our services are going to stay the same. We just want more inquiries. At that point, the strategy may be a bit more different. Maybe it's going to be more of a sort of link focused, or maybe building out different content areas around different pain points and taking it sort of with that approach. So I think that the concept of scaling also depends on the team size and what you envision doing, because obviously with bigger businesses, where assuming that they're not super lean and that they've got, set functions with lots of people working there, then it becomes a whole different challenge in terms of what you need to do when you're scaling, because you don't want to step on any toes and you want to make sure that people are aligned in terms of what's happening, so that you don't make a change and all of a sudden somebody sort of overwrites it, or sort of, delete something that you've done accidentally without them knowing. So it becomes a whole nother challenge. So I think it really depends on what that scaling looks like.
Awesome. Just to quickly, I know Darius has a question lined up, but from your experience of working with billion-dollar companies, what would if you could give any advice to SME owners or business owners in terms of their approach and mindset shift towards SEO? Say they may be hesitant to invest more in SEO. Is there something that you could advise them from working with billion-dollar companies that they could maybe consider in their mindset approach towards SEO and SEO strategies?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, bigger companies generally will have had the experience. They would have sort of gone through difficulties. It would have been a lot of trial and error. They don't just, get to $1 billion overnight, right? So it's a case of them having the experience that an SME owner may not have in terms of the sort of challenges. But what these big companies will have is they will have systems and processes in place that are very sort of set. You think about like a massive machine with all of the different cogs doing their thing, and sort of that's typically what you see, especially when you're dealing with businesses that have lots of employees, thousands of employees all around the world. And as an SME, it's like, well, if you're thinking to yourself, you want to get to that point, specifically from an SEO perspective, you also need to understand what are the sort of viable channels in the marketing mix that are going to be driving that potential growth to you. Because sometimes it's not going to be SEO as a silo, especially nowadays when we're seeing just how complicated the space is, and the marketing mix is really sort of jumbled into all sorts of different things, whether it's dark social and different things that you can't exactly track and see. So you have to be really sort of clear in terms of your audience, who it is that you're targeting. If your audience is also going to change in the future, because if you've given yourself a 10-year time frame, is it the case that maybe you're going to have maybe younger types of audiences who are going to be buying from you 10 years from now, that you need to think about how you can target them, and sort of what do those channels look like? So it becomes quite a very, I guess, big picture type of sort of situation, where it's like you're going to have to think to yourself as an SME business owner in terms of, what is it going to look like, or what's it going to take for me to be able to reach the right people now, in 5 years, in 10 years, and sort of understand where SEO plays into that, and sort of the relationship that it has with other channels as well. Because I don't like the concept of siloing everything, where it's, for example, you say SEO is the most important channel, it means we don't need paid, it means we don't need social. I think that's a very sort of narrow-minded approach in terms of the reality of consumers and how people find things, and how people are what attracts people to buy. So it's one of those things where, like, the mindset shift that you're sort of mentioning, I think it's something that sometimes does just, quite frankly, come from experience, in terms of you kind of see what activities you've got at the moment, seeing what's been working, and just experiment with things, because it's much easier to experiment with things when you're a smaller business as it is when you're much larger, especially if you're not at the top of the company, or if you've got, stakeholders and shareholders to account to, and they've all got their different things, and investors want certain things. You're going to have sort of less leeway to really be testing. So I would say sort of the best thing you can do is really just keep an eye out, make sure you've got your tracking set up correctly, and just experiment and see what is sort of working at the moment, just to give you a better idea in terms of how to focus, at least on the marketing front, into the long term when you're trying to scale.
I love that. Itamar, you mentioned at the start about the marketing exec coming in and having to do everything initially. When companies do decide to sort of scale out their SEO teams, even with yourselves at Studio Hawk, what are the biggest issues that you've seen, the common mistakes, and how would you go about avoiding them in the future?
Yeah, I'd say some common mistakes generally is when like people sometimes struggle to let things go, which can be an issue. I find it especially not just for the marketing managers, but even for like the founders, where it's like they want to be involved in every little thing that happens. They want to be involved in the meetings with the SEO teams or the SEO agencies or whoever it is, and they sort of want to always sort of know what's going on. And I understand that, but I think that's where a lot of sort of like emotions get too caught up in terms of the actual business. And I think for you to scale and grow a business, you have to sort of take your emotions out of it and think about things more objectively and say, look, well, we've hired these people to do a job, so I'm going to let them do it and they can tell me how we're doing. And if we're not doing well, then that's another conversation that we'll then have. But I think that that is one of the most common mistakes we've seen with smaller businesses, where the sort of founders really do want to be, updated in every single thing that's happening, want to be in all the calls. And I'm like, look, if you want to do that, that's fine. But also, that's more resources that we're going to need to utilize, right? It's like that's more time that we need to put in if you want to have specific calls about things or the comms, because sometimes that can add up as well. And again, like we have to be efficient with what we're doing. We've got a certain amount of resources at our disposal to create the most impact and the most value. And sometimes founders can be the bottleneck of that in certain instances. So that's usually the main thing that we find.
Awesome. And when it comes to hiring, I suppose, at different levels as well, how do you sort of vet candidates who maybe at a more sort of mid to senior level compared to that, somebody who's maybe just a year or two into the industry?
Are you saying that from the client's perspective for people in that
team? From your sort of perspective?
So from our side, it's we've sort of opted more for the route of training people from the ground up. There's obviously benefits to bringing somebody in who is experienced and sort of you can sort of plug and play, but sometimes there are also challenges with that in terms of like, well, how have they learned? What are their methodologies and these things? And sometimes it's quite difficult if they've got maybe a way of process that might not be as efficient, trying to make somebody sort of unlearn that and then sort of change their process sort of to what you want to do. That can be very tricky as well. And then, there can be bits of ego that get caught in the way of people like, well, this is how I've always done it. Like, who are you to sort of like tell me I've done something inefficiently? So it can be a bit tricky, but from the sort of like junior route for us, it's good because we've got people in the team who have been around for a long time and can sort of offer that support and training from the ground up to really build up their foundations in quite an efficient way as well. So it means that they're actually able to pick up skills much faster than say I would have when I was in their position as well. So that route typically is what we've been doing and has been working quite well for us.
Awesome. I love that route. The only sort of question on that is obviously you're putting that sort of time and investment into training and development. And then you always run the risk with every company of them sort of leaving down the line. How do you guys ensure that sort of culturally wise you retain people? Obviously, as long as possible, people are always going to move on and try different things, but how do you try and maintain that for as long as possible and sort of reap that investment back again?
Yeah, so I think it's like you're sort of saying, I think culture fits are, in our opinion anyway, in my opinion especially, like it's more important than a lot of people might think. And I think that when it comes to somebody's attitude, that's something that always stands out a lot more in terms of when you compare it to what it is that they know. I think soft skills, generally speaking, at that level are way more impactful than hard skills, because you can build up hard skills by having strong soft skills. And I think they're at least what is going to help somebody be able to be, to adapt over time, learn quicker, be more curious. And you can really suss out from people in terms of if they actually really enjoy the concept of SEO, at least. Like for me personally, like I bloody love it. Like I love doing the job. And for when I speak to people, sometimes they'll tell me they're like, that kind of resonates because they can see that. They can see you're really passionate about it and you really like it. And that's the sort of thing that we try and look out for as well, like people who are genuinely interested in what they're doing, and they really are fascinated by it, and they love the aspect of it. And this is something that, you know, not everyone is going to have, but it's like when you come across people who have that, it's very telling. Like, it's very easy to see somebody who has the sort of right approach, that hunger, that really sort of helps, at least to make sure for them that it's like you're going to be put in a good place where you can progress your career, you can learn loads of things, and you can do really well, and there's sort of like growth opportunities for you, and sort of showing that roadmap. So that is yeah, I would say that's the kind of ways that we can generally sort of identify who the more promising types of candidates would be.
Perfect.
Building off of that, I think, yeah, Studio Hawk does do that so well, where they take candidates in from a young sort of experience level and then train them up. When moving into a leadership role or position, what do you guys sort of look for when or identify in your teammates and team members that help transition them into that leadership position? And is there anything in particular that you look for or try to train for during that stage?
Yeah, I'd say for us it's been a bit different because it has really always started from that junior route, bar myself and my colleague Sophie. But in the sort of the theory of because like being involved in like an SLT or like a leadership team, it's very different than being just like a practitioner or just like an SEO person, because there's
Yeah.
different types of skills that you need, and there's different things day to day that are going to be included that you're not going to necessarily know or learn from just having been that practitioner. So when it comes to those sorts of things, I think it's a lot about understanding people and how to manage people, how to sort of communicate with clarity, and all of these things is where that becomes a more pivotal part of it, because people need to sort of see you as a leader. They need to be able to respect you as a leader and know that they can come to you with any problems that they're facing. So like being approachable enough for that, but also being able to help give them clarity and give them the answers that they're looking for to help them. That's a really important part, and it's a hard thing to answer whether that's something that you can sort of pick up naturally, because some people say like there are certain like natural born leaders, and some people say, well, no, it's more of a nurture thing of like you learning over time. So it is really tricky. It really also depends on the type of business that you're in. So from an agency standpoint, I guess it's more about sort of, yeah, being able to sort of have the perception from the team side of like seeing you or being in a leadership team as somebody they can approach when they need to, and you know, somebody who can communicate really well and really help them with anything that goes on, whether it's big or small. So but because, yeah, as far as I know, like we're not like hiring leadership types of positions at the moment, so that's why it's sort of, I'm giving more of the theoretical type of answer in terms of at least things that I've seen and that sort of stuff.
Perfect. And to wrap up, always leave the hardest question for the last, especially with all of the evolutions and things that are changing at the moment. I always like to sort of end off by asking our guests what their predictions are for their forecasts for the SEO industry at the moment. I mean, even asking for the next 5 years might be a big jump, but maybe to the end of the year or into next year, do you have any predictions or forecasts of where the industry may be going?
Yeah, I do agree with you. I'm sort of more in the camp now that it's like, how are things going to look by the autumn, you know, as opposed to
Yeah.
just looking that, you know, a few years into the future. And this is more a sort of shift that I've had in the past like 2 years of sort of really seeing what that means. But in terms of what I think is going to be happening, I mean, generally, I think traffic is going to decrease. I think that we're going to see still some very sort of difficult times in terms of attribution of marketing in general from an SEO perspective, or at least thinking about Google itself. I think Google is not going to be going away by any means. I think that it's still going to use all of the knowledge, the money, the resources, the history the data that it has on pretty much most people on Earth to be able to sort of compete if we're speaking about the likes of LLMs and OpenAI and all these different types of AI platforms. But there are, there's things that are sort of being in the works or being introduced at the moment in terms of, from a consumer perspective, I think it's a very exciting time. It's like you being able to get personalized types of results and then being able to check out directly within one type of screen. Like that's something that we've not really seen before ever. And I think we're going to probably be, we're going to need to get used to seeing a bunch of new cool things that make people's lives easier. And I guess from a marketing perspective, it's just understanding, okay, what does this look like in terms of what we can do on our websites, on our other platforms to create a strong sense of trust, credibility as a way to be able to be recommended by different platforms, and also as a way to, build a loyal customer base. I think the days of sort of the COVID era, and there was lots of fast fashion and people weren't very sort of brand loyal. I think that pendulum is sort of swinging back. I think there's going to be a real push in terms of how businesses can really build up their brands again and sort of build a strong customer base, because they're going to need to, because there's going to be so much competition out there, and not solely from a website perspective, but also with the other mediums that people are getting information and recommendations from. So that's pretty much a whirlwind of a type of answer. I mean, who knows? I could be completely wrong, but we'll see.
I think they're right. The appropriate answer at the end of it is just who knows. But yeah, Itamar, thank you so much. That was such an incredible and insightful episode. If anyone is listening and wants to follow Itamar, check out his LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else that people can find you? I know that you do have a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, generally, if people search for my name, they shouldn't miss me. I don't think there's anyone else in the world that has my name. So, you can find LinkedIn. Very good. Yeah, you can find LinkedIn. I've got a podcast called SEO Unplugged, where I just talk with people about SEO. Shock horror. So yeah, you can check that out if you'd like. But yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn if you've got any questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining. It was such a great chat. And yeah, we'll pop your social links all around when it goes up on YouTube and Spotify. And yeah, have a good weekend and we'll chat soon.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Cheers.